Thanks to our one and only Governor of Talk Radio, Cliff Kelley. This is America's Heroes Group, our roundtable with our Secretary McDonough's Office of U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Today is Saturday, March 25th, 2023. March is Women History Month. Our host you just heard was Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have a panelist with us today, a very great guest, Michelle Spivak. She's a Senior Communications Officer for the Veterans Health Administration of Office of Communications. And we're going to talk about VHA Food Insecurity. Food insecurity, how it affects veterans, and what can we do about it. To give you some background about Michelle, she is a journalist in broadcast and print media, years of experience working with VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations, directing marketing, funding, communications, and program development. She has been with the Department of Veterans Affairs for 21 years, which includes her work at the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center, where she was the Director of Communications, the Congressional Liaison, and Chief of the Patient Advocate Office. For the past 8 years, she's been serving her current role. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderfully. How are you today?
Great. So tell us, what exactly is food insecurity, and how does that impact people's health?
You know, first of all, let me just say thanks for having us. For me, it's a pleasure to join you and to speak to your audience about VA healthcare. Food insecurity. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says that food insecurity is a lack of consistent access to enough food for an active and healthy life, or a household with an economic level and a social condition that limits or has uncertain access to adequate food. Across the U.S., hard to believe, but an estimated 10% of U.S. households are food insecure, and that's about 13.5 million Americans.
Wow, that's really amazing. That is also very startling and saddening. One research report showed that veterans have a 7.5 times greater risk of experiencing food insecurity than non-veterans. That's a little bit disconcerting. So tell us, give us some background. So what does it look like for the veteran? What is food insecurity? How does it occur for a veteran, someone who served the country, all of a sudden is finding themselves in a situation where they're basically facing malnutrition?
Well, you know, that's a great question. Actually, the risk factors for food insecurity are exactly the same for veterans as they are for the general public. So one of the factors is to have a lower socioeconomic status. Basically, you're living at the poverty line or below. Underemployment or unemployment situations that happen to all of us occasionally can get you into a situation where you are faced with housing costs that you can't meet, inflation that's difficult and challenging, increased food prices, and then all kinds of stressors that you might have in your personal household. So those are the types of things that happen to every American at some time or another if they are unfortunate, and that happens just as often to veterans.
And the sad thing is, I've been talking to a lot of people that work at food banks and food depositories, and what I've been hearing is that there's been an increase of people needing food, healthy food particularly. So the food lines are getting longer. People are feeling the pressure of inflation, and it's something that really has impacted people, veterans and non-veterans alike, across the country.
Mm-hmm. So
tell me.
And that's really true. So many times people only have enough money to pay for the unhealthy foods, you know, and those foods lead to obesity, and then you have numerous health problems that are caused by obesity. You could have cardiovascular disease. You could get type 2 diabetes. So you could go down this slippery slope of really having challenges to your life because of food insecurity, and our country needs to address it.
One statistic that was on the VA's website that I noticed was that veterans, particularly when they're first-year veterans, are 3 times more likely to require food assistance or SNAP benefits, so basically food stamps for the most part. Do you have a sense of that, and can you walk me through that problem? You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier.
Well, I can't tell you the data. I don't have that at my fingertips, but I can tell you that veterans a certain segment of veterans are suffering from food insecurity, And we're very concerned at the VA, and we're addressing it by actually establishing an office that deals exclusively with this issue. And we are putting together teams, both of the professionals in our organization that deal with homelessness, mental health, that deal with social work services, nursing, so that we can help these veterans in a collaborative way. And we're also reaching out to build partnerships with federal agencies like DOD and USDA, and with community organizations that are focused on helping people who have food shortages, who are nutritionally challenged, who have challenges with accessing good quality care, good quality food in their neighborhoods. So we're building coalitions, and we hope that that will also help to support not only veterans, but the greater community.
So what is nutrition security? What exactly is that?
Well, it's the opposite side of food insecurity. So when you think about nutrition security, you're talking about what the U.S. Department of Agriculture would say a consistent, equitable access to healthy food, safe food, and food that's affordable. The foods that are essential to people for their health and for their well-being. And so what we're hoping and what we are working toward is ensuring that all veterans have security in the access to their food. We want to support people throughout all their stages of life, but particularly we're concerned with veterans who may have complex health conditions on top of having food insecurity.
So when people are going to the food banks and going to different other resources because of inflation, because of the problems that we have in our economy right now, what is the VA doing about this issue as far as nutrition security? How does the VA help people get access to affordable, nutritious food?
Well, one thing we do, I'm really proud of this, I think it's a wonderful program that we have, is we have food banks at 62 locations across the country. And these food banks are staffed by VA employees and volunteers. We always love our volunteers. And veterans can come to these food banks to collect food if they need. And we hope that our partners in the community will help us to access food sources, fresh food, local farmers, food that could be delivered to our food banks, so that we can expand these programs and grow them across the nation.
And then when people go to these food banks, what's the experience like? Do they have to show need? Do they have to have any kind of special, do they have to bring a DD-214 in order to get access to these food banks?
Well, it's for our enrolled veteran population. It's definitely for people who are already getting their health care at a VA. So we do hope that as many veterans as possible who aren't using VA, and there are quite a few veterans who haven't enrolled for VA care yet. We hope that they will consider going to the VA and exploring all the different services that we have to offer them, not only for health care, but for employment opportunities and for mental health care, and for various services that will improve their well-being in general.
And then you also mentioned, and some of the information you brought to us was that people can volunteer and people can get involved. Tell us about that process. How do people get involved to help the situation?
Well, every hospital across the country would welcome volunteers. We have voluntary service offices, and there are many, many ways that people can volunteer. They can not only come to our facilities and keep veterans company and help transport them throughout the facilities, but they can help with blood drives that we run on a regular basis. When it comes to nutrition, we do wish that people will visit our website, which is www.nutrition.va.gov/food insecurity. And there they will see a lot of the different resources that we offer, and they can consider also looking at the volunteer opportunities to help veterans.
Let me ask you this personally. How long have you kind of looked at the issue of food insecurity in your professional career? Because you worked in communications, you've done things in media, you've done things with veterans organizations in the VA. So how focused
I'm
have you
really
been
proud of all the things that we've done. One of the things that I absolutely love, a program that I ran and helped to coordinate with our social work service team and other teams at the VA Medical Center in Washington, D.C., was the homeless outreach program that we did every year, where we welcomed veterans to come to get warm clothing, to get food, to get medical treatment. And in that case, we were encouraging them to come whether they were enrolled or not enrolled. And so that's one of the programs that I'm very proud of. Every area of our hospital participated in our homeless programs, and a particular outreach event was one where we transported people from homeless shelters and from the street over to our hospital. And they do that all across the country at all of our facilities, have a homeless, they call it the homeless stand down. But day in and day out, we reach out to homeless veterans and hope to find them housing, get them the food and the health care that they need, and improve their lives and get them on a path of independence.
I'm glad you talked about that, because a lot of people that are in the veteran community, particularly if they're homeless, may not have the DD-214, may not have been enrolled into the VA system. Is it an easy process to get enrolled for a person who's homeless? How would you describe that process?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not an enrollment person, so I'm not 100% certain what the process is, but I can tell you that if there is a veteran that seeks to be enrolled in VA, we will do our best to assist them. If they can't find their DD-214, there are people that will help to find the paperwork and the support that they need to start the process of enrollment. No one should be discouraged or concerned about the paperwork. They should go and seek the help, because there are people there that will help them.
Glad to hear that. And then also, in this particular economy, because of the fact you've had a lot of experience with homelessness, you've had a lot of experience with people that are in the VA system, people that are food insecure, how would you compare this phase of history, I guess you could say, that we're going through right now? Because inflation has been a big problem, and many people have been talking about this in social media, about the fact that food is expensive, and people are starting to cut back, hopefully cutting back to unhealthy stuff versus the healthy stuff. But a lot of people are facing food insecurity, and particularly in the veteran community. Like what I mentioned before, those new veterans that are just brand new out of service, getting their first year, trying to find their career, finding their new career in the civilian life, are facing a food insecurity. How would you rate, or from your personal perspective, how would you rate this particular time in history? Is this as bad as any other time you've seen? Is it worse? Is it better?
Well, I wish I was a historian and I could answer that question.
Well, just in your personal experience, from your personal experience.
You know what I think? I think we're at a very important place when it comes to VA resources, because we have a great budget. We have a very, very good budget that the Congress has allotted us, and I think we have the resources to do a lot of good for veterans. And I encourage veterans and their family members to seek VA support. We have many programs that will help veterans, and we are opening our doors to veterans. You probably already know about the PACT Act and how many new veterans can apply to be screened for toxic exposure. So there are many things. I think this is a time when veterans are being appreciated, and when the veterans budget is good, and we're going to be able to help many, many veterans.
And then tell me, how did you get involved with food insecurity? What sparked your interest in it? How did you kind of become an expert in this particular topic?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the topic, but I appreciate your saying that. What I would say is I'm somebody who had a deep concern, even as a younger person, about homelessness. And when I worked at a veteran service organization, we worked with a shelter in D.C., and we supported the veterans there. We brought food and clothing to them, and we integrated them in some of the national events that were taking place at the nation's capital. For example, we brought groups of homeless veterans from the shelters to participate in Memorial Day and Veteran Day services at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. So I guess it's always been a passion of mine, an interest of mine, and I'm very, very hopeful that with the success we've had at VA in housing veterans over the past few years and reducing the number of homeless veterans, that this will continue, that this trend will continue.
What do you think are some of the main strategies or tactics that the VA has used to reduce homelessness across the country? Because that's one thing that is a good thing that's happened in the last few years. Homeless numbers across the veteran population have decreased, but from what we've seen. What are the success stories in order to make that happen?
Well, again, it's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you that the homeless program leadership that we have are they're using what's called the housing first model. So they're encouraging veterans first and foremost. They're trying to get veterans housing, and from there to proceed to get them the services that they need. Could be health care, could be support in getting employed, could be mental health services. So the Housing First program is the program that is really helping to reduce the number of homeless veterans on the street and house more veterans. Over 38,000 veterans last year were housed through the VA program.
Wow. And then, so if someone sees a person on the street who identifies themselves as a veteran, maybe they have a Vietnam veteran cap on, or they have a Vietnam or military jacket on, or BDU on, or pants or something like that on, and they say, okay, were you in the military? And you have a conversation, you find out this person is homeless. What would you say to that person to encourage them to try to help that veteran get help?
Well, that happens to me. I'm sure it happens to many of you, many of your listeners. I'll see someone who is on the street and asking for change or something, and I'll give them my card, and I'll say, "Are you a veteran? If you are, you need to get to the VA. We will help you. There are programs for you." I always encourage people that I see who are homeless, if they are veterans, to go to the VA.
I think that's very good advice, and something that we can all use to help people that we see on the streets all the time, because we run across the homeless veterans all the time in our daily lives, particularly if you live in urban areas. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm glad to have you back on our show sometime in the future. I hope you'll come back and be a guest again.
It would be my pleasure.
This is America's Heroes Group. We just talked to Michelle Spivak. She is the Senior Communications Officer for Veterans Health Administration Office of Communications. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Cliff Kelley, Vietnam veteran, co-founder, and host of America's Heroes Group. We have helped hundreds and thousands of veterans find the resources they needed to move on past trauma, find the services they need to heal, find training, jobs, and housing. That's our mission. To support this mission so that we can continue our work and have even more veteran stories of overcoming and success, we need your help. Right now, please consider making a donation to America's Heroes Group. Dig deep and give what you can to support this mission and help those veterans in need. You can donate through Chase Bank's Zelle app by adding America's Heroes Group as a recipient with our phone number 312-804-5831. You can donate through PayPal on our website, americashg.org. From the home page, go to donations, or you can go straight to www.americashg.org/donations. And finally, you can send a check to America's Heroes Group, Inc., 155 North Quaker Drive, Suite 4250, Chicago, Illinois, 60606.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group, our roundtable with a community outreach with the NADCP, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. Today is Saturday, March 25th, 2023. March is Women's History Month. My host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Clement, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Production, and in charge of all things technical around here. And we have a panelist with us today, a great guest, if I may say the least. She is an actor, producer, and activist who played the Assistant Press Secretary Carol Fitzpatrick in The West Wing. Melissa is a Senior Director of Justice for Vets. Thanks for coming on our show.
Well, thank you for having me. And I just want to correct one thing. I started as the Senior Director of Justice for Vets, and now I am the Director of the Advancing Justice Initiative at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And I only correct it because the Director of Justice for Vets is a phenomenal veteran who I think you've had on your show, Scott Taroki. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't ever want to take anything away from him. He's fabulous.
Well, thanks for that update. I appreciate that.
Sure. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for having my colleagues on, too, in the past to talk about our work. We really appreciate getting the word out there.
And it's really important because this is something that really has had a positive impact on not just how veterans are treated in the legal system, but how and people that have substance abuse issues and things like that, but actually as a blueprint to help the justice system across the board because it saves money and it's more successful. So tell me, so you were an actress. You were on The West Wing. You were in the movie Frequency with Dennis Quaid. You did a guest appearance on, or I could call it a cameo. I would call it on the Truman Show, the movie The Truman Show with Jim Carrey. You did an episode on Grey's Anatomy.
Boy, you know my resume better than I do. I'm impressed.
But tell me, so how do you leave Hollywood and then become a person who's actively fighting for veterans? My hunch is it has something to do with your family. But tell me about how that worked.
Well, when I lived in Los Angeles, I was really very fortunate to work with several other actors, and we started a nonprofit working with at-risk teens on a mentoring theater program. And we ultimately took that program to war-torn northern Uganda to work with former abducted child soldiers and other teenagers displaced by that just brutal rebel war. And that really opened my eyes to the impact of war on communities. And when I returned, we made a documentary about that experience, and one of the gentlemen who was working with us, editing and helping us write, Paul Friedman, a wonderful filmmaker and human rights activist, he was doing videos for the Army, and he was working with men and women who he felt were struggling. And he said, I feel like there's a story here, and I'd like to tell that story in a film. And I said, I'd love to help you tell that story. So we worked together on, with other producers, obviously, and I got Max Cleland, the great Max and late wonderful Max Cleland involved, and he shared his story, returning home, struggling with post-traumatic stress, and we profiled several other veterans who struggled with the transition home. Some were self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, and it was a very powerful experience to work on that film. And at the same time, I lost a dear friend to addiction. And Martin Sheen invited me, who'd been a champion of treatment courts for, at that point, about almost 20 years. And he invited me to speak at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals National Conference here in D.C., and it turns out my father was a judge and recently retired, but he was a judge who started one of these courts. He started a mental health court. So that all those things at once came together to really open my eyes to what was happening. And National Association of Drug Court Professionals had just launched Justice for Vets. And I became a supporter because I felt very strongly that, I guess as an actor in acting school, they taught us to act is to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you really have gratitude for the service of our veterans, let's show it in our feet. Let's show it through actions. Let's support programs that work for veterans and their families, and programs like Veterans Treatment Courts. And I felt that it was a real opportunity and a gift to be able to support the work that Justice for Vets was doing at that time. And then they were looking for a senior director, and I remember talking to a dear friend of mine, Tommy Riemann, who at that time was really struggling. And, you know, he was profiled in the film, Halfway Home. Mm-hmm. He was one of the gentlemen that was profiled in the film. And, you know, in 2003, he was on a reconnaissance mission in Iraq. His convoy came under heavy fire. He used his body as a human shield. He was shot twice, 11 shrapnel wounds. And, you know, he miraculously recovered and was, you know, there's an action figure after Tommy, a video game. Wow. In 2007, President Bush acknowledged him in the State of the Union address, several minutes standing ovation. He's an American hero. Mm-hmm. And amid all the accolades and the honors, he was struggling. Mm-hmm. And, you know, his family life was falling apart. He was self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And after a night of heavy drinking, he wanted to end his life, and he left a note, and he drove his truck into a tree. And again, miraculously, he survived. But he was facing charges. And there was not a Veterans Treatment Court where he lived in North Carolina. I remember I talked to him, and he said, you know, I think you should do that job. I said, because it's too late for me, but it's not too late for my brothers and sisters, and I'll help you however I can. And thank goodness it was not too late for Tommy, because a couple months later, the very first Veterans Treatment Court opened not too far from where he lived in North Carolina. He became one of their first participants, and one of my happiest days was being able to attend his graduation from the Veterans Treatment Court. And he is now happily married, and he's living a life of which he's proud.
Wow.
So that really motivated me to want to do this job, and to be able to have the opportunity to say thank you for your service in a more active way.
So to illustrate the power of the Veterans Court, what tools and resources, and how is it different from what his experience would have been in the regular, simple civilian court system versus what he experienced in the Veterans Treatment Court?
Well, treatment courts in general are alternatives to incarceration for individuals who've been arrested, who have a substance use and or mental health disorder. And they can receive treatment. They receive, it's a holistic approach. It's kind of, and Veterans Treatment Courts is a one-stop shop for veterans. And Veterans Treatment Courts work very closely with the VA and the Veterans Justice Outreach Specialists at the VA. And it's treatment. So they are given treatment, and it's individualized, which I think is very important. And in a Veterans Treatment Court, they are there with their fellow veterans. And it is really, I mean, traveling around the country visiting Veterans Treatment Courts, one of the things I heard so much was, in this courtroom, I got my unit back. Mm-hmm. And many veterans said to me, I've been arrested before, incarcerated before, and I was a number. In Veterans Treatment Court, they use my name. They thank me for my service. The judge, the court team, the treatment providers, the probation, parole, everybody is there cheering me on, wanting me to be successful, and giving me the tools and the treatment that I need to be successful. Now, these programs are strict accountability, of course, but there's also hope and humanity, and everyone is treated as an individual with respect and dignity. And you really see how that is so wildly successful. And the other piece that a Veterans Treatment Court has are veterans from the community volunteer to serve as mentors to their fellow veterans. And they can help connect them to resources in the community, and be somebody that they can talk to and have a shared experience.
You touched on a very important word, accountability, which a lot of people, when they see, because there's always this discourse between people that want to be tough on crime and want to punish and lock people up and things like that, and then the evidence and the science, it shows that, well, if you treat the problem as opposed to just treating a symptom, then you can actually get some success and actually reduce recidivism and all the types of things that are going on in the court system. And veterans
100%.
courts, yeah, I mean, we can go into those numbers a little bit later about how successful veterans court and treatment courts in general are. But so that accountability,
it can reduce recidivism by up to 58%.
Wow.
So you said something that I often think about, like tough on crime. Treatment courts are very tough on crime, and they're tough on crime by reducing it. So when you return individuals to the community healthy and healed, that is how you reduce crime. And, our veterans are of our nation's greatest and most valuable resource. We need our veterans in our communities. And with treatment courts, our veterans are returning to our communities, and they're being the real assets that we need.
Now, your former castmates on the West Wing have been very supportive, and actually, I saw the PSA you guys did a few years back.
Great.
Yeah, so I mean, it was touching, and at the same time, it was, I wouldn't say not ironic, but in a fantasy world where there's a fictional White House with a fictional group of people trying to solve the world's problems, the actual actors are trying to solve some of the toughest problems here in this country right now, in the real world. So tell me, how have they been supported? How have they helped you raise awareness to what's going on with this?
In every way I've asked. I mean, and that our organization has asked of them. And all of them do so much for our country, for the community. And I think, the show did give us an opportunity and a platform. And I think Brad Whitford said something about, somebody had said to him, you've been given this platform. You can either use it for yourself or you can use it to help others. And I think that is a group of people that has chosen to use it to help others. And certainly our work has benefited from that. I personally have benefited from that. And Martin Sheen was really our leader in that. He has been a champion for social justice issues forever. And his march towards social justice has inspired all of us. And, I wouldn't be doing this work if not for Martin and my father. So I will be forever grateful for all of their help. And they've done PSAs, they've gone on media, they've come to graduations of treatment courts as well, and written op-eds. Dule Hill wrote a beautiful op-ed about his visit to a veterans treatment court in Philadelphia. They show up. I mean, they're phenomenal. They are just phenomenal. And I couldn't ask for a better group of colleagues and friends and really family.
Wow. And that's really good that you can, do work in your career and actually develop a family. Because a lot of times we go to work and we meet people, but we don't have those connections. But it shows that, the work that they're supporting you with, and then also the fact that this is not an easy task. This is not, rolling a pebble down the hill. This is pushing a boulder uphill. So that being said, how much influence did your mother have? Because she was a volunteer. Now, you've done a lot of volunteer work in your life. You did work in Uganda. Yeah. You did work. You doing work with this. You started. Was it a vocal group and when you were in college?
A mentoring theater program for at-risk teens in Los Angeles. Yep.
And what was the name of that program?
Voices in Harmony.
Voices in Harmony. Okay, yeah. So I thought it was a singing group when I first.
Well, it certainly sounds like it. Yeah. But we were referring to speaking voice. I don't think we thought that probably people would hear it as singing.
So how did you get this passion for volunteer work and also for helping veterans, for helping people in general, doing all the stuff you've done around the world?
Well, I think watching my parents have a real passion for that work, my mother and my father both, and getting so much out of it themselves. I see them as people who are fed by service and fed by being part of their community. They love it. Like, they live for it. My father, if you talk to him about being a judge, he's like, it's the best job in the world. And he loved it. And he started a mental health court back when it was a heavy lift to start a mental health court. Now, of course, there's so much more data and evidence about how these courts really work. It is, thank goodness, a little bit easier. But I think seeing that, and I went to a school that really valued service. We had a service organization at our school. And I think once you start volunteering and being part of your community, it's hard not to realize that really the benefit is to yourself. It's just, I look at the friendships I had, and Los Angeles, as an actor, it could be kind of a lonely place. And I never felt that. I had the best friends in the whole world, West Wing ones, but also my friends who started Voices in Harmony with me and supported Voices in Harmony over the years. It was a really wonderful group of people, and many of them are still very deeply in my life. And I wouldn't have met them otherwise. So it is a gift, I think, to yourself as much as anything else.
So, do you see this this attention and information that you're bringing to the forefront on Veterans Treatment Court and treatment courts in general? Do you see this as a way to reform the social justice system or the justice system in general across the country?
Absolutely. Right before I started working here, I think it was about 2 weeks before I attended. My father was receiving an award for his judicial excellence in his career, and one of the things he said when he was talking about treatment courts was, we have to, as a nation, decide how we are going to treat the most vulnerable among us. Are we going to take them into our hearts, or are we going to take them into our prisons? And I think that treatment courts prove that when you take them into our hearts, there's less of a need to take them into our prisons, because treatment courts return healthy individuals to their communities, to our communities. And I think that the lessons that are learned through treatment courts, the things that work, evidence-based treatment, evidence-based programs that work, can work across the justice system. And when so many individuals who are incarcerated have substance use and or mental health disorders, we know that there's a better way. We know that treatment can work, and accountability and structure through a court program and support. So applying those lessons across the board, I think, is really wise.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, as a person who, I pay attention to, money and things like that along these lines, but the thing of it is that it's more cost effective.
It sure is.
It's way more cost effective. Like there was a study from Lamont Rainey, 2019. According to Nebraska Administrative Office of Courts and Probation, the cost of supervision for a participant is $7.85 per day. This is in the Nebraska system. So $7.85 per day for a treatment program where the person is getting supervision. Okay, by comparison, the Department of Correctional Services lists its cost per day for an inmate in a prison, $105.83. So you'd rather pay $7.85 per day or $105.83.
Right. And when you think about when someone comes out of prison, it'll be harder for them to get a job. Most likely they have not received evidence-based treatment. They will come out and, they've been separated from their family, separated from their community. So there's a breakdown there. They're not coming out in as good a place as they could be going through something like a treatment court program. So, as another thing my dad said when I asked him originally about treatment courts, he's like, Melissa, anybody who knows anything about these courts is for them, and they're for them because they work. And I'm like, he's right. They do. They work by saving lives, restoring families, making our communities safer, and saving the taxpayer a tremendous amount of money.
Very smart. So tell us about your book. You have a book that you wrote.
Yeah. Well, we're not finished yet. We're still after I leave you, I'm going to go home and write. But
this is make sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's next? The backstage pass to the West Wing, its cast, crew, and enduring legacy of service.
Yes, that is it.
This with Mary McCormick.
Yes, who is an actress on the West Wing, and Mary McCormick has been she's a Justice for Vets ambassador here for our organization, and her sister was the Chief Justice on the State Supreme Court of Michigan, and they were tremendously supportive of treatment courts and veterans treatment courts. Their father was a veteran, and a really incredible man who passed recently, but proud veteran, and they were very proud of their father's service. So Mary and I really wanted to tell the story of the West Wing family, and it's basically what you asked me earlier about the support that they've given to different causes and different issues, and we want to elevate those issues in the book. But of course, it's a backstage fun book for fans too, because we'll talk about We'll profile several episodes. We'll talk about behind-the-scenes fun stories about different characters. So we've done probably, I'd say, 60, 70 interviews so far. The whole cast, the crew, the producers, the writers, they've all been involved. The creators of the show, Aaron Sorkin, generously is involved. Peter Roth, who was the head of Warner Brothers Television at the time, Tommy Schlamme, executive producer and original director, and all the actors. So we're very excited about the book.
And the thing
I'm very excited to finish it, too. Get my weekends back.
But take your time. Do due diligence. Take your time to get it done the way you want it.
We will.
But the thing is, so The West Wing was one of the most phenomenal and groundbreaking shows in television and media history because it was such an important show. I mean, that show is up there with the groundbreaking shows like MASH or All in the Family or any groundbreaking show, particularly for that time and that space in American history, because it showed how it kind of gave you an inside glimpse, and people would have, the peanut gallery would have arguments and discussions and discourse about how real it was or how accurate it might have been to real life. But it got people thinking about real topics and real things without being confrontational or being or putting people down or making people feel bad for their points of views. All different types of points of views, from the religious right to the liberal left to the people in the middle. Everybody had a voice. Everybody was represented, and there was a discussion in real time.
Yeah. I mean, definitely had a point of view, for sure. Mm-hmm. And I feel very lucky to have been a small part of that show. I really do. It was certainly changed my life. I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing now if not for that show. I certainly wouldn't have the support that we've had. And just being part of it at the time was amazing. It really was remarkable I remember the scripts. I mean, the writing on that show was spectacular. Yes. And I remember they would deliver the scripts to my apartment, to everybody's apartment, or everyone's homes and apartments, but I lived in an apartment. So they would deliver the scripts, hand deliver, the hard copy in an envelope sealed. It says, if the seal's broken, contact Warner Brothers. And wow. I remember it was such a joy to read the scripts because they're so beautifully written. I would be so excited to get it, the next one for the next episode, and I would just go in my apartment, turn off the phone, and read it, the whole thing. And it was just a joy. It really was.
Particularly Martin Sheen's, his speeches were very well written.
Oh.
I mean, you couldn't ask for a better speechwriter than what he had or whatever he was coming up. He was just, but in the shows, he typically was just winging it, walking in on a conversation when people are arguing. They come in like Abraham Lincoln repossessed from the dead and give this speech, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." That was a phenomenal show. Did you think you would get that role? How hard was it for you to come across that opportunity and then get awarded that role?
I mean, I remember when I read the script, the pilot episode, and I said to myself and to my agent, I just said, this is going to be the best show ever on television. And I don't care if I say one word on it one time. I want to be a part of it. And, I feel very fortunate that did happen, and I got to be a small part of it, and I got to see and work with some of the best actors alive, with some of the best writing ever created, and directing. I mean, my gosh, it was just it was a joy. It really was. And then to end up with some of the best people still in my life, 24 years later from when we started it, I feel so fortunate.
Wow.
So fortunate.
We have about 2 minutes left. So could you tell us what was the most important lesson you learned on the West Wing?
I think that there's to work together as a team and a family, and that every single person needs to be respected, honored, and they will bring something that's needed to the party. And I think that's what happens in treatment courts, too. People are treated as individuals, and they are treated with dignity and respect, and they are held to a high standard, just as we were at work, and you've got to meet those high standards, but you have the support and the team around you to be successful.
And in that process, we're making communities more successful, making our veterans' lives better. We're actually honoring our veterans in a way that they need to be honored and should be honored by treating them like humans and also helping them overcome problems that they had in the past versus just punishing a person, not really treating the actual root cause of the problem and having them come back into the system over and over again.
Exactly.
I would love to have you guys back on the show. You guys you have to come back on our show and actually give us more information, particularly when that book is out. Let us know when that book is.
Oh, we'd love to.
Yes, let us know when
we'd
that book
love
is
to.
done.
And we'll be talking about our work in the book. We talk about treatment courts in the book. We talk about other issues and causes that other people have been working on. So it's it's definitely, there's a call to action in there too.
I appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. What a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for your great work.
Thank you. This is America's Heroes Group. We just had a great conversation with Melissa Fitzgerald. She is, I didn't get your new title again. You have to repeat.
I'm the Director of Advancing Justice at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals.
She said it. America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Cliff Kelley, Vietnam veteran, co-founder, and host of America's Heroes Group. We have helped hundreds and thousands of veterans find the resources they needed to move on past trauma, find the services they need to heal, find training, jobs, and housing. That's our mission. To support this mission so that we can continue our work and have even more veteran stories of overcoming and success, we need your help. Right now, please consider making a donation to America's Heroes Group. Dig deep and give what you can to support this mission and help those veterans in need. You can donate through Chase Bank's Zelle app by adding America's Heroes Group as a recipient with our phone number 312-804-5831. You can donate through PayPal on our website, americashg.org. From the home page, go to donations, or you can go straight to www.americashg.org/donations. And finally, you can send a check to America's Heroes Group, Inc., 155 North Quaker Drive, Suite 4250, Chicago, Illinois, 60606.
We have in our Chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much. People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, the service, the food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
On behalf of Cliff Kelley, America's Heroes Group, we sincerely thank Chase Bank for coming where it matters to help homeless veterans have a hot meal today and a care package. We are sincerely grateful for this partnership. Yes. Yes.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelley, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world.
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
Where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group. This time with our Roundtable community outreach with Black Veterans Project. Today is Saturday, March 25th, 2023. March is Women's History Month. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Clinton, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scout to Honor Productions. And we have a panelist with us again. You heard his voice many times before, Richard Brookshire. He is a co-founder of Black Veterans Project, a nonpartisan 501c3. This nonprofit elevates public education around the unique history of Black veterans here in the United States. And we're going to have a discussion about the Internal Affairs report that shows Black veterans are more often denied benefits for post-traumatic stress disorder than their white counterparts. This is going back from 2017, but this has just recently surfaced. And we have a video. We're going to play the video. You're going to hear the audio. You might even see the video on our social media. We're going to hit that right now.
This is the love language of New Orleans. Professed on this day for World War II veteran Lawrence Brooks. 112 years old, this is how the World War II Museum celebrated the nation's oldest surviving veteran, serving 5 years in the Army in the Pacific.
Happy birthday, Mr. Brooks.
Oh, Lord, he loved the victory bells. He used to say, I can't wait to see them girls.
His daughter Vanessa, his caretaker in his final years.
How did it feel to see your father celebrated like that?
It put a smile on his face, and that was mainly what it was all about.
The status of oldest veteran earned him national attention, and on Veterans Day of 2021, a call from the president himself.
Mr. Brooks.
Yes, hello. Happy Veterans Day.
I know. Well, thank you. That's why I called you. You deserve to be called on Veterans Day.
Oh, thank you so much for calling.
2 months after that call, Vanessa's father passed away.
Oh, God, help me. He was my hero. He loved everyone. And I am so proud to be his daughter.
But of all the honors bestowed on her dad that day, there was one well-intentioned act from a local community college that Vanessa says broke her heart. An honorary degree for a man who never got the chance to go to college in the segregated South.
He didn't achieve this. He always wanted to go to school.
Okay.
He never got the opportunity to go to school.
The GI Bill of 1944 promised all veterans returning home from war an education along with housing and unemployment insurance, all meant to create a strong middle class in America. Historian Richard Rothstein.
In practice, African Americans had very, very little opportunity to use the GI benefits that the GI Bill provided throughout the South. In the North, it was somewhat better.
A study by Brandeis University projects, based on limited available data from the VA, that descendants of World War II veterans lost $80,000 in economic opportunity.
African Americans never gained that wealth, and therefore the effects of that policy still perpetuate the inequality of today.
This might not be my generation's fault, but it is absolutely my generation's opportunity to fix.
Democratic Congressman and veteran Seth Moulton and fellow House member Jim Claiborne introduced a new bill that would offer descendants of World War II veterans an education and housing. Opponents said it was too costly, and it failed in the last Congress.
This is no giveaway. This is to restore the rights of those people who never got them.
Claiborne's compromise bill is the VA Housing Forever Act. It would focus only on the housing benefit that would allow descendants of veterans, regardless of race, to use the loan. The new Republican chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee says he will consider it, calling past racism deplorable and saying that they will attempt to right this wrong. But some veterans aren't waiting for Congress to agree.
The GI Bill is the reason that I have my education. It's the reason that I have health care. So I know how consequential the obstruction around these benefits can be.
And they're taking on disparities beyond just housing and education benefits. Veteran Richard Brookshire of the nonprofit Black Veterans Project worked with Yale Law School, which sued the VA on behalf of Vietnam veteran Conley Monk Jr. over decades of medical benefits being denied.
Took me 40 years altogether.
It was through that landmark litigation and access to VA documents that they found Black veterans were getting disability claims denied at a higher rate than whites.
And we were able to glean that over the course of the last 20 years, there were statistically significant disparities. One as striking as a 29% greater likelihood of denial for PTSD claims.
In a statement to NBC News, the VA admits the disparities, but it says they're working to bridge the gap.
I think that there's an education gap when you're coming out of the military to even understand the breadth of the benefits that you can be afforded.
Back in New Orleans, Vanessa realized when she became her father's caretaker, there were other benefits that he was missing out on. He had only been receiving less than $100 a month in pension for decades.
When my dad told me $91, I knew something deep down in my spirit. No, this is not right.
VA records requested by NBC News show it wasn't until she reapplied for him at 105 years old that his pension increased by $700 a month. The VA continued to increase his payments, some retroactively. And only 2 months before his funeral, he finally received just over $2,000 a month.
I truly believe he would have been getting $91 until the day he died had I not went down there.
What do you hope happens?
I hope that they could correct the wrong and make it right. Not just for my family, but for at least millions of Black veterans that were denied.
Denied, but she prays not forgotten, and that maybe her father's enduring legacy will help other veterans in their battle for better benefits.
He would always say, I don't look at color, baby, because we all bleed the same color, blood.
And Lucy joins us now with more. Lucy, we've seen in a lot of cases the GI Bill benefits for Black veterans were worth just 40% of the value that we saw for white vets. How widespread is this?
Well, Gotti, at this point, here's what we know. That number is coming from research done by Brandeis University. And one of the things that they found is that there is very sporadic.
Are you there with us today? Richard? Richard Berkshire, co-founder of Black Veterans Project, nonpartisan 501c3, having some technical difficulties and on the line right now. But listening to that video, we have a lot of things to unpack. Richard, are you there now? No, so we lost him again. So basically, one of the things we want to talk about on this show, and Richard comes back on the line, is that how Black vets were more likely to see combat than their white counterparts in Vietnam. However, during that same conflict, you have people coming home not getting the full benefits that they deserved and what they fought for. Very ironic. But on top of that, you have a legacy of discriminatory practices and disparities. Richard, are you here with us now?
I'm here. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. I appreciate you bringing this information to us and bringing this clip. One of the things we want to kind of unpack, kind of get to the bottom of, is in your view, is the our country has always had a story about race and race relations. There's always been a dichotomy and a separation of races, segregation that extends all the way back to the beginning of this country. In your view, is this type of discrimination that stories we've heard, people that were retired, getting $91 a month for retirement when they should be getting thousands of dollars?
Right.
Is that something that was just an oversight? Once we want to believe that after 1968 and after the Civil Rights Movement is kind of come to full center, and LBJ signs all these different laws and puts them into effect.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's layered, it's compounded, but I also think that yes, there are some nefarious actions at play. And I'll speak to some of the things that we've kind of gleaned through our FOIAs and the work that we've been doing over the course of the last 4 years and investigating this really. And we haven't even expanded out to really looking at disparities in pensions, right? Like, we've only really been studying disparities in disability compensation and just happened to have come across this 2017 report. It was the first time that the VA, because for decades they've been saying that, hey, we don't have the ability to track race in just the kind of broad analysis of accessibility when it comes to these benefits. They hadn't codified a way to start to track race when folks were putting in claims. And the revelations, a whistleblower essentially came forward about a year and a half ago, and based off of his allegations, we FOIA'd to try to substantiate what he had to say. And we looked at 3 months of emails with senior VA officials out of VBA, and they're kind of going back and forth, and it proves, one, that they actually do have the ability to check for race, that they deemed it not cost effective to actually apply race in claims decisions. So these are policy choices, right? And what I think is most remarkable is that they had run one analysis, a PTSD analysis that accounted for race, and they found widespread disparities of as much as 12% over a 5-year period. You're talking about tens of thousands of Black vets that should have been getting disability. And this isn't even talking about disparities that might exist in actual claims decisions by way of rating, right? Like, some folks feel they get much less than their white counterparts, right? This is just strictly denials, right? Like outright denials. So anyways, with that, we see a series of emails go back and forth, folks essentially obfuscating their responsibility to share their findings with the Center for Minority Veterans, with other advocate groups, with whomever, keeping this internal report essentially suppressed, right? So I think that behavior becomes alarming. And we also talk about nefarious dealings when it comes to what's actually happening on the ground level with claims decisions. There was a whistleblower who'd come forward in emails to high-level officials at VBA, basically saying that, hey, there were multiple folks who were changing records out, that were actually taking medical files out of Black patients' medical records so that they would be denied, and putting medical files in white folks' records so that they would be approved. And that person essentially being swatted and told not to correspond about this issue further. And it's just like, it's behavior like that I think shouldn't be alarming to any level of Black vets. I think that what started my desire to even want to do any of this work, or any of the folks that we work with, is that there had been a long history and kind of knowing in the Black community that there was behaviors that was affecting equal access and equal treatment, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this work has just been trying to uncover what the VA knew, how much it knew, right? And what did it do with the information? And what we do know to be true is that it's been 5 years, and if it were not for our FOIAs, that information about PTSD disparities would still not be made public.
So this report came out in 2017, but just now recently surfaced, based on the whistleblower that kind of gave you the insight to go and get the information. So I mean, the thing is so disheartening. So there's another story that was tied into that article you sent us. So there was a story of Larry Hayes. He served 21 years in the Air Force. So when you served more than 20 years, you and I know as veterans that you're a lifer. You did your career. That was your career. You were a military airman. Okay, he retires from the military after 20 years, 21, and he's denied benefits. He's denied VA benefits. And the record said he never served. That he never served the military. How do you spend 21 years in the military and then you come out and there's no paperwork to show that you ever served? And he had a DD-214 in his hand. It took him 2.5 years with the help of an attorney to get his VA benefits.
Yeah.
So what's happening to try to get these things rectified? How much work does the veteran need to do in order to look into this, in order to get their due compensation?
Yeah.
How much is the VA doing?
Well, what I'm finding, I mean, I think it's layered, right? And like, I don't suppose to have all the solutions. I think that the first part of that response is we're looking at just wanting to have an open and honest public discourse about the history of it, about the extent of it, and about the need for some level of repair for it, right? Because what's been done to Black vets is multi-generational, and it comes up in different ways, and disability compensation and access to broader VA benefits is but one, right? But you think about going back to World War II, and even in the reporting, we talked about Conley Monk and his father's not ability to attain a housing loan, right? And how he was obstructed from gaining access to education benefits. And then Conley comes along in the Vietnam era, gets a dishonorable discharge that is clearly racially motivated, and it takes him 40 years of fighting to try to gain access to those same benefits, plus the disability compensation. So it's layered, it's complex. I think that, what I've noticed in organizing is that so many of our organizations are severely underfunded, right? And there's an ecosystem of organizations that don't necessarily always serve the Black community well, that are very well funded. VA knows this, DC knows this. This is nothing new. So I think that there's obviously a need to ensure that our community-based organizations, our grassroots organizations that serve Black vets and their interests, are provided for in some fashion. And then I think there's other things, by way of the VA that they have to kind of, introduce. They have to introduce incrementally. There are folks that are now, especially with this administration, thinking about how do you start to tackle these issues more forthrightly? How do you foster a level of equity? They've done it before. I mean, at the end of the day, there were gross disparities faced by MST survivors, for instance, right? And they were able to make significant inroads in the last 5 years. And so it's not that these things can't happen. It's just that there needs to be a willingness to actually confront the issue, which I think this administration is certainly doing in many respects. What I think the administration could do better is provide a level of transparency, right? At the end of the day, the only formal report, quote unquote, that we've been able to find in 20 years that VA's done around this issue is this PTSD study that was buried for 5 years. So, we want to understand the broader history, what VA knows, kind of, extensively, so that you can then measure progress. Then, because ultimately you're not having a forthright conversation if you're not actually being forthright about the damage done, right? And the extent of the disparities that were able to continue for long periods of time. So I hope that answers some of your questions, but yes. We're still trying to figure out solutions, right? And one last thing, I think you think about the bill on the Hill, the GI Bill Restoration Act, or the Housing Loan Forever Act, which I talked about last time I was on. These are obvious solutions when you talk about trying to extend some level of repair, right? Connolly's suit that Yale is doing and settling that so that there is a pathway for Black vets who've experienced some of these discriminations to be able to, sue for compensation. I think that's also obviously an avenue that should be explored. I think there's no one-pronged solution, though. I
think you hit it on the head. So the blueprint was laid out in some of the stories that we had on the video and on the audio. The people need to look into their situations and make sure they get proper legal counsel if necessary, but look into it at least. Ask your veterans and your families, which might be a guarded topic because we're talking about oftentimes finances and things like that, but it's an important conversation. One of the ladies that was a relative of one of the veterans, her grandfather or family member was getting $91 a month, and she thought, you've been in certain all these conflicts, you've done all this work, and you get $91 a month for retirement? How are you supposed to live off of that? Yeah. She did the research and found out.
And the secretary said in his press conference this week, I think something really important. He was saying, hey, Black folks have even been more represented in the last 30 years. But there is this disillusionment that I do think with particular segments of our population certainly has settled in. And there's a level of folks that just kind of dismiss it or just feel like this is, how I, was treated for decades, or folks that there's so much legal red tape that they have to navigate sometimes. And Lord, I can only imagine when you're actually dealing with the traumas of war, dealing with, the realities of life, especially if you come from underserved communities to begin with, trying to navigate all of that just so you can get health care, just so you can get some level of decent compensation for your wounds or what have you. I think it is certainly something that our country has to contend with. And I think that broader veterans obviously have been contending with it. You don't get a bill like the PACT Act last year without the veterans community flexing. But I think what has happened to, and what I think is the last kind of indictment that I've not actually really spoken much about, is the complicity of the power structures in the Veterans Affairs ecosystem, the large veterans-based organizations that had racial blind spots for decades that allowed these kinds of disparities to persist. Right. And I think that's also a more nuanced and uncomfortable conversation, but one that has to be had out loud.
We definitely have to. We have to revisit this conversation and talk more about what has been going on and what can be done to solve this issue, because it's something that cannot just be swept under the carpet. Now that it's out in the open and we have the data and the evidence to show what many people have been saying for decades, and many veterans have been saying for many different conflicts throughout the years, we have to get a hold of this and make things right and do it the right way and take care of our veterans, all our veterans.
Absolutely.
Richard Berkshire is a co-founder of Black Veterans Project, a nonpartisan 501c3. Thank you for your time again.
Thanks so much.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Cliff Kelley, Vietnam veteran, co-founder, and host of America's Heroes Group. We have helped hundreds and thousands of veterans find the resources they needed to move on past trauma, find the services they need to heal, find training, jobs, and housing. That's our mission. To support this mission so that we can continue our work and have even more veteran stories of overcoming and success, we need your help. Right now, please consider making a donation to America's Heroes Group. Dig deep and give what you can to support this mission and help those veterans in need. You can donate through Chase Bank's Zelle app by adding America's Heroes Group as a recipient with our phone number 312-804-5831. You can donate through PayPal on our website, americashg.org. From the home page, go to donations, or you can go straight to www.americashg.org/donations. And finally, you can send a check to America's Heroes Group, Inc., 155 North Quaker Drive, Suite 4250, Chicago, Illinois, 60606.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group with our roundtable and our partner, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer-Ruth of Battle Proven Leadership. Today is Saturday, March 25th, 2023. March is Women's History Month. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Cleveland, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have our partner with us, the one and only Jennifer-Ruth Green. She is a Lieutenant Colonel of the Indiana Air Force National Guard and a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, combat veteran of Iraqi Freedom, and a founder and CEO of Battle Proven Leadership. And we're going to continue this conversation about the role of a leader, and also talking about some of the important things that leadership has to offer and what we need to see in our leaders. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. It's awesome to be able to connect with you again.
My pleasure. So tell us, where does leadership begin? You had a quote that you kind of instilled on us last time you mentioned this. And you said basically that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So tell us about that and kind of take us down that path.
Absolutely. So leadership is not a job, it's a responsibility. And so sometimes when people take on the role of a leader, it's because of, prestige or power or position. But really, we have to consider purpose when we're talking about leadership. And if our purpose is to continue to grow ourselves, to gain ourselves, to get more money, power, prestige, or position, then we're not going to be effective as leaders, because nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So you can walk in and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to work everybody to the bone. We're going to work as hard as we can and try to do as much as we can. And we're going to meet these metrics. But if that's all to make you look good and not to take care of your people, or you're not concerned about who they are, what they believe, why they believe it, their families, that kind of thing, then it's going to be a very difficult situation for you to try to get buy-in. And teams are built on trust. And if people can trust you, they'll crawl over broken glass for you. You've seen it. I've seen it. When you have a team of people that trust one another, it's far greater, the impact is far greater than a group of people who are motivated towards a common goal.
Well, I would say that, especially by my time in the military and also even professionally in my careers, that it's easier to follow somebody and you feel, especially with a military background, I would say, for me personally, you want to follow someone who actually cares about the mission at hand and you feel that who cares about you and how you're doing rather than just barking orders. So someone that comes in and 100%. Says, okay, this is the task at hand, this is what we need to do to get it done, but I do care about how this affects you. I do care about what the outcome is and what the toll is on you physically or mentally or professionally, however that might be. So tell us, what's the role of a leader? You have to give us 3 different tenets about that.
Yes, and you have a really good memory. A leader's roles, I think, fall into 3 specific categories. First of all, you have to understand the scope of leadership. You have to understand how big it is, what your responsibility is within that role. And then when you break it down a little bit later, you have to think about leadership and you, and then you have to think about leadership and other people. So the leadership in you is kind of your role, your responsibility, how you prepare yourself, how you develop your philosophies, and all of those individual pieces that someone must consider. And I look forward to exploring each of those elements a little bit later. But understanding the scope of leadership is first and foremost. And that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about today.
So take us through that. Tell us about that scope.
Yes. So I firmly believe, if we look at those 3 specific areas, when we talk about a leader's, big picture view, you have to understand fundamentally as a leader that you have to fight for your people. And that in and of itself dovetails into what we just talked about, that leadership is not a job, it's a responsibility. And so it's a responsibility for you to take care of someone else. And so, when I was a freshman at the Air Force Academy, 9/11 occurred. And I remember exactly where I was. There was the commander of Pacific Air Forces, a 3-star general was there. And there was a major at the time who's now a 1-star general. And that major was the general's exec. And so the entirety of the international relations with a focus on Asia, the Japanese majors or the international studies majors for Asia, Japanese language students, Chinese language students, we were all in a room and kind of getting an overview, unclassified brief on what was happening in the Pacific. So we sat there and the general was talking. And then all of a sudden the major comes in, Major Bell, and he whispers in the general's ear. And he whispers something, and then the general just leaves. And so as good cadets, we kind of sat there, just sitting, waiting, had no idea what to do or if we should move, if we were supposed to move, because the general, was briefing us. What if he comes back? No one's going to leave. And then eventually it became time for us to transition to the next hour class. And so we just kind of looked at one another, and nobody was coming in to tell us what to do. And so we got up and went to the next class, unknowingly, whether or not we were going to get in trouble because, the general was expecting a room full of people. But we got up, went to the next class, and it was English. And I remember walking into English, and my instructor was a captain, and there was a TV on the wall. And we saw, the images and the replay of the second plane hitting the second tower. And I don't know that I understood it at that point, but clearly that day was the start where we became a nation unofficially at war. And we had been attacked, and we didn't know it at the time, but we knew something was happening. And so turns out, years later, we understood that he had whispered to the general that there's an attack, and whether they brought him to safety, whether they put him in a secure location, whether he was going to get briefed on what Pacific forces, his generals or his other subordinate leaders needed to say, that was the circumstance. And so when I think about that situation, we had people in our class as freshmen who had the opportunity to leave, to say, hey, 2002, President George Bush, Congress, they had declared our war on terror, and we were going to fight a war on 2 fronts. And so when you're at a service academy, you have until your junior year when you're required to commit to the military. So you're going to give the military 5 years, whether it's in enlisted time, whether you're in jail, whether you commission, whether you pay that money back financially in a compensation package and a number they provide. You were going to give them the equivalent of 5 years of your life. And so in light of that, it was important for us to consider whether we wanted to go into our junior year and commit to being in the military. So I was pleased and excited that there was nobody in our class that said, hey, we're going to be a nation at war and we need to step down, or we're not going to be in this fight. We are not going to be involved. Everybody stayed. And so it was very impactful because to me, it showed me that we were here for the right reasons. We knew that our responsibility was to support and defend the Constitution. We knew that it was our responsibility to take care of people, and that's what we were going to do, take care of the American people. And so in 2009, that was when I was a young captain and I volunteered for a tour to Iraq. And I love it, this quote that's attributed to George Orwell. He says, "People sleep peaceably in their beds at night because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf." And it's 2009, for 7 years, I had slept peaceably in my bed at night. We hadn't had, the infrastructure problems. We hadn't had the opportunity. I had the opportunity to go to the hospital. I had the opportunity to drive a store. I had the opportunity to feel safe and secure. And that was because there were people who had been ready to do violence on my behalf. And so I had classmates, previous academy grads that I had known, those that I'd served alongside with at the academy, who had gone and kept, war at bay. And so there's significant people in my life who have been impacted, who are never coming home, and their families had been impacted. And I felt very strongly that it was my responsibility to go to combat for people that I knew. And so there was a man named Matt Kuglix. He was a special agent. And my Air Force specialty code, MOS rate, was to be a counterintelligence agent. And so I was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and so was Matt Kuglix. And in 2007, Matt Kuglix went to the Middle East, and he was on his second deployment. He had actually finished one deployment successfully. He came back, and one of his colleagues had said to their commander, "Hey, sir, I'm not going to be able to go. I know it's my responsibility, but if I do go, it's going to cause family problems. I've been gone too much, and I need to stay home with my family." And so Matt, he volunteered to go in someone's stead. He said, "I'm not married. It's fine. I'll go back." So Matt went back. And when he went to combat again on his second tour, unfortunately, he lost his life. And I remember going to his funeral. And I remember seeing how clearly loved he was by his family and his colleagues. And I remember the vision of sacrifice. And I remember that he wanted to be in a place where he could serve people, his colleagues, people that he knew, but then also in combat. And so that stuck with me. And then the summer that I was going, I had two classmates. One of them was a classmate of mine named Mark McDonough. He was a captain. He was a pilot. And he died flying over Afghanistan in combat. And he wasn't coming home. But he had gone to allow me to sleep peaceably in my bed at night. And then First Lieutenant Rosalind Schulte, she was a class behind me. Roz was amazing, incredibly smart and talented. She was an intelligence officer, and she was impacted by an improvised explosive device. And Roz lost her life. And so those three people, Roz and Matt and Mark, I was fighting for them. I was fighting for people that I knew. I was fighting because their families deserved to have the safety that my family had as a result of them going over there and keeping war at bay. But my primary responsibility as a counterintelligence agent was to vet and recruit spies. That was our training. And I had some additional primary responsibilities in combat, but that was my primary training. And so I remember one day meeting a source. He was an Iraqi man, and he shared with me the information that I was looking for. And the entire time that we had worked and engaged with him over a couple of days, we had picked him up at different times. We had sent people to pick him up at different places, sometimes in the dead of night. And we wanted to be at a place where nobody could associate him working with us, because very active in that region in Baghdad was Al-Qaeda Iraq. And they had a sect called Jaish al-Mahdi, JAM. And they were incredibly active. And in fact, AQI, or Al-Qaeda Iraq, had kidnapped him several years prior. And in starting this entire venture, he had given us the information that he needed. I'm fast forwarding and rewinding a little bit, but I'll make it clear. So I'm meeting with him in the summer of 2009, and we're sitting across from one another. It gives me the information I need. And I remember pointedly asking him, why do you do this? Why do you risk your life for American objectives? And he said, because I believe in a better Iraq, and I believe that Americans can help us. And so he started telling me his story. And he started by telling me that several years earlier, how his daughter had been kidnapped. How he had been kidnapped by Iraqi operatives, and how they had tortured him and beat him and said, we know you're working for Americans. We know that you're going against Iraqis. We absolutely know this. And he said, no, I'm just an English teacher. I have nothing to do with any of this. I'm not experienced with anything that you're talking about. I'm just here trying to serve my country. And so they beat him. He was bruised and he was battered. And after 3 days, they finally returned him to his family because they finally believed his story. But a couple years later, after they continued to watch him and give him many threats, they ended up kidnapping his daughter as she was walking home from a study session one day. And they called him and said, here's a $200,000 ransom. And if you don't pay it, you'll never see your daughter again. And so she was beaten and bruised and just essentially put in a position where she would never be the same again for 7 days. And I'll spare the details, but essentially during that time, he had called, his American handlers and basically said, they have my daughter and I need to get her back. And so we were able to concoct a plan and be able to rescue her. And after 7 days, they were reunited. And in thinking through this, the level of sacrifice, the willingness that he had to put himself and his life and the lives of his family on the line, it was not for American objectives. It was because he believed in something bigger than himself. And it really taught me a lesson, because I was there and I had volunteered my life and my time to fight for people that I knew, Roz and Matt and Mark. But he was fighting for people that he would never know. He was fighting for the countrymen of his home country. He fought because he would never meet all the Iraqis, but he knew that they deserved a better future, and this was the way he believed it could be done. And so the scope of his leadership, or the scope of his mindset, was bigger than himself, and it was not only people that he knew, his family, his friends, his church mates, people at the grocery store. It was for the entire country. And so as we fast forward in my life, I come back from Iraq and understood his scope in an entirely different way, but I had been safe, and I knew that there were at least 5 times that my life was spared. And I wondered, what did I do and did it matter? Well, I was at church one morning, and I wasn't constantly thinking about combat or thinking about, the things that I had done or those. It wasn't a constant in my mind. However, there was a missionary that day from Iraq, and our church had been supporting him. And the pastor invited the missionary to come up and share a few words about his experiences. And so he was sharing, he got up to share, and the first thing he did was just begin to weep uncontrollably. And he was at the pulpit just crying. And he began to tell us, first and foremost, thank you. He said, thank you, America, for coming to my country. Thank you so much for allowing me the freedom from the oppressive regime. He said, I was under Saddam Hussein's rule, and during that time, we couldn't worship how we wanted to, and now I have the opportunity to have freedom of worship. Now I have the opportunity to share insight and thoughts and religious values and think differently, and now I can have, my faith produced on the radio station, and I can talk about what I believe and why I believe it. And he said, thank you for sending people. And I remember thinking that there was just this great lift, this burden that was lifted from my shoulders. I didn't really understand what it was, but I knew that I'd never known what my full purpose was. And so here this man now had an opportunity that he would have never had I not gone in the first place. But at the end of the day, it helped broaden my scope a little bit more. I had gone to Iraq to fight for people that I knew, Roz and Matt and Mark. But then I realized through my Iraqi source that I had to fight for people that I didn't know. But then I realized I was also fighting for people who would never know my name. And so I would never have met this man. I would never have an engagement or an opportunity to connect with him. But now here he is telling me how my actions, in a small way, had impacted his ability to be free. And so when I think about the scope of leadership, these life lessons for me have been incredible. When I think about the fact that it's my responsibility to fight for people that I know, I think about the immediate people that are in my sphere, my family, my friends, like we talked about, or just the people that I love. And so when I think about leadership and I think about people who are, running the C-suite or who are managers, you fight for the people that you see every day. Maybe it's the secretary who sits outside your office. Maybe it's the person who sits in the roundtable meeting with you. Maybe it's the person that you connect with. But also you have to fight for the people you don't know. If you work for a large company, there are people who don't have their names on the parking spots. There are people who will never have the opportunity to sit at the round table, and you have to fight for them too. And maybe that's creating a policy like maternity leave, or maybe that's, providing a lactation room, or maybe that's making something more ADA compliant. And you have to fight for people that you don't know. And you have to stand up and say, this is how I lead, because the scope of my leadership is more than just the people that I talk to and see. But then lastly, thinking about fighting for people who will never know your name, you have to broaden your scope and think about 50 years from now, 75 years from now. No one's going to think of Jennifer-Ruth Green. Very rarely do we have heroes in history. We think about George Washington, or we think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or Mahatma Gandhi, and we think about the things that they did. I don't know that Rosa Parks was sitting down thinking very clearly about how, 60, 70 years from now, African Americans would have the freedom to have integration and ride, buses and fly planes and be a part of an integrated society. But she was willing to do what it took that day, and there's an impact today as a result of her leadership that day. And so what I think is really important for us as leaders is understanding the scope. We can't just look straight in front of us. We have to think about the people we don't see, but we also have to think about the people who will never see us. And when we think about leadership, if we can understand the scope of who we're fighting, it will make us better, because our decisions don't just impact us, and our decisions don't just impact today. And so if we can get that foundationally and fundamentally as leaders, we will start the foundation off very clearly, and then we can continue to work on the tactical, practical methods, the hands-on ways for us to be impactful. And so those stories have shaped my life. And I believe if we as leaders can grasp that with in our initial assessment, we're going to do much better.
It's interesting you brought up the Iraq War, because we're coming up on a lot of a lot of people have been talking about it. It's been on the minds of many, many people, because we're talking about the execution of Saddam Hussein and how that went horribly wrong during the idea of trying to instill democracy or pass on democracy from the United States over into Iraq, I should say. So how do you respond to people that say that when we look at leadership and we look at the leadership we had after 9/11, but prior to the Iraqi invasion, that we were going into a war for the purpose of finding weapons of mass destruction, never having found weapons of mass destruction, and then 20 years later, we leave Afghanistan essentially in the same condition, if not worse, than where we found it, and leave Iraq in a situation where it's still heads or tails whether or not we made any real progress. We have stories, yes, and we have opportunity, but Iraq is not the country it was 20 years ago.
You're absolutely right. When I think about my personal analysis of the situation again, and I'll give a quick caveat, not endorsed or sponsored by the DOD in any way, just Jennifer-Ruth Green as a private citizen, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of this war thinking about the war on terror, thinking, what if we lose? And to that end, we got the best uniforms, we got the best tanks, the best airplanes. We trained everybody. We changed our uniforms to desert camo because the green BDUs weren't going to be reflective and allow us to be incognito, if you will, in the desert. We changed everything about what we needed to do. We changed our standard operating procedures to fight a different type of war, and so we spent a lot of time answering the question, what if we lose? So we went in and rained fire, and after 2 years, then we had neutralized the threat effectively, as in our enemies were not capable of bringing great grave damage to our assets. We had established dominance.
To this point, what risk did Afghanistan? They were the ground zero for an operation that was started in Saudi Arabia. That came to came to Afghanistan, trained a bunch of people to go launch airplanes into buildings. What threat was Iraq to the United States, other than the idea that we thought as a nation, we're told as a nation, that they had weapons of mass destruction? It would turn out to be false. What other threat did they pose to America?
That's a good question. I don't have any specific answers to that, but what I do know is that the commander-in-chief does not make decisions in a vacuum. And so if there's a cabinet, there are chiefs of staff, there are secretaries that involve their entire decision-making and assessment in, speaking to the president and commander-in-chief. And so in thinking through that, I don't think it's fair to Monday morning quarterback an executive's decision, only because all of us military leaders have to go on the action or the information we have at the time. And so if President Bush sincerely believed that and was willing to put the lives of Americans on the line, I have to trust that it was with the intent and understanding that that's what he believed. And so the president unilaterally can't constitutionally declare war. Congress constitutionally declares war. And so if all of these people were duped or all of these people were in on a plan in order to get Americans to lose their lives for the sake of what, I don't know. But what I do know is that things don't happen in a vacuum, and constitutionally it's a requirement for them to be able to figure out what they need to do. And so I have to trust that that's what happened. So I can't Monday morning quarterback that, and also I wasn't in the room to understand what evidence they were looking at.
Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about the push now in the government to kind of rewind or wind back the powers of the executive branch? So the president before, under which George Bush pushed forward, the ability to use a lot more powers to wage war against the war on terror to get us into Iraq and Afghanistan. How they're now trying to bring that back. And I wasn't aware we're going to go into this part of the conversation, but how do you feel about that effort being done by the current administration now?
Sure.
You got about 30 seconds. I'm sorry. We got about 30 seconds now.
30 seconds. So in my opinion, there's this clause that allows the president to have exigent circumstances, essentially. Can't remember the title of it. But basically, if you need to deploy forces quickly and we don't have the time to wait for all of this to catch up with you, to declare war, to do this, to do that, then you have the opportunity to use emergency action. And holding that back, I think, is wise, because there's a great requirement. There's a great risk of life in what the tools are that you're being willing to use. So I think it's important to have many eyes on particular situations, especially involving Americans' lives.
Thanks a lot for that. I really appreciate your time, and you give us a lot of stuff to think about. And I would love to have longer conversations with you, because I think you have a lot of important things to say. And on top of that, I think having that conversation is necessary. I really appreciate you being on our show. This is America's Heroes Group. You've been great always on our show. So Jennifer-Ruth Green, Lieutenant Colonel for the Indiana Air Force National Guard, appreciate you.
God bless you. Thank you.
That's why we partner with excellence. Excellence begot excellence. Iron sharpens iron. Yes, Jennifer.
Thanks, Glenda. I appreciate the time. I know that's like a fire hose. We're talking about a lot of things, but we'll continue. I appreciate your kindness.
More Saturdays coming.
Absolutely. Just getting started.
Saturdays coming. So
Okay, so thank you guys. We're running short on time, but thank you guys always for listening to America's Heroes Group. Regarding any information or resources in regards to what you may need concerning businesses, housing, and whatever, please feel free to call America's Heroes Group, 312-803-2618. We're located at 155 North Wacker Drive, Suite 4250. We have 4 great shows today. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Oh, Michelle was fabulous. We had also the National Association of Drug Court Professional, Melissa. Wow, what a personality. Richard Brashear. Yes, Black Veterans Project. We just getting started. We on our way to D.C. Yes, we are. Then, lastly, Jennifer knocked it out the park. We appreciate you guys so much. Our digital media producer is well, and he's back. Our family is back. Yeah, Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Production, the best digital media producer we have ever had. To our technical producer, Lady Shy, who keeps us balanced every week at WVON. Blessings and love, you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Sean, you are the co-host. Boom.